Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this USME Center webinar. I am Alessio Pettino. I am business advisor at the USME Center, and I will be moderating today's webinar. So the webinar is about food additives, which is obviously a very important sector. It's a bit tricky, so we decided to do some activities in this area. And trying to change the slide. So today's webinar will be divided into three parts. As usual, we will spend a few minutes at the beginning to introduce who we are, what we do, including some new services that we have just recently launched. Then the core part of the webinar will be the introduction by our two experts about our report that we have recently completed on food additives, and we will go through the regulations, some practical cases, and then last there will be a Q&A session, but of course you are welcome to submit questions at any time during in the Q&A box, and we will prioritize the questions as first. About the EU SME Centre, for those of you who don't know us, we are an European Union funded project. We have been around since 2010, so it's already the 13th year. We are currently funded by the Single Market Program, and we are in the fourth phase, which will run until 2025. Our mission is to support European small and medium-sized enterprises, but also entrepreneurs and startups to enter China or just to get to know China, know the opportunities as well as the challenges. And we are implemented by a consortium of 6 partners as associated partners in both Europe and China. You can find them on the bottom of this slide. Among these, the China-Italy Chamber of Commerce is the leading partner and is also co-organizing this webinar today with us. We have 5 main services. Self-diagnosis tool, I will spend a few minutes on this later. Knowledge center, basically we write case studies, guidelines, market reports on different sectors or cross-cutting issues, and like the one that we are presenting today on food additives, and all of this is completely free. Advice, we have an advice center, basically sort of help desk that European companies can use to ask any questions to our experts. We can answer either via email or one-to-one calls, very confidential. And these questions can be very technical as well. For instance, what standards I have to follow, what does this standard say, or what are the labeling information, and so on. Training center, we organize webinars and training like we are doing today, and we are now expanding our offering for hybrid and offline events, hopefully in China very soon, but also in Europe. And last, we have an advocacy platform through which we try to spread information about upcoming draft regulations, calls for comments, and so on. I want to spend a couple of minutes on this new self-diagnosis tool, which was launched 2 weeks ago. Basically, is a tool that help you clarify some doubts, understand where you are in your approach journey to the Chinese market. It's very simple, actually. It's just some questions that with very simple answers that will guide you through some aspects which we think are very important for you to know. And then you can see, for instance, this example here. Can you stick the label once the product arrives in China, or do you have to do it before? And then there is an answer. And then, of course, we also recommend some relevant publications that we have produced through the recent years. And then at the end, of course, there will also be other recommendations for training webinars that we have made, and you will have the opportunity, if you want, to discuss some of these questions in detail with us, confidentially, one by one, and this is completely free. What is important to mention is that this self-diagnosis tool, we did it in a way that is tailored to your answer. So basically, depending on the answer that you select in one question, then you will go through other questions which will depend on your answer. So it's very tailored to your unique experience. And at the end, you will have the chance to discuss with us if you want. For instance, this is also part of our advice center that I mentioned before. For instance, typical questions that we receive is, what Chinese standards should my product comply with? And we are going to see this a lot in this presentation today. For instance, can I use benzoic acid or other additives in meat products, or other additives in wine, or other products? Or How can I know very common questions? How can I know why my GACC registration for food and beverage was rejected? But many others, not only in food and beverage, in any sectors, or energy and or legal contracts and so on. And this is, we can discuss this absolutely again for free. You can send us an email through our website. You can also send an email to our email addresses if you want. And we very welcome you to do so. Very last today's webinar is about this report on food additives that we have recently produced. Basically, we all know that China has established a very solid but a very complex system for regulating and managing food additives. This might be a bit scary. We will see this today in our presentation, that there is one main standard which has different tables in different appendixes, which are not very straightforward. So European companies might have some difficulties if they're not very acquainted with China to understand at the end what they have to do. So we have received many questions on this. For instance, scope of food additives, whether a certain additive is allowed to be used in products, or to what percentages, or how do we have to label food products which contain food additives. And also very important questions is whether GACC registration is needed for food additives. All these issues are covered in the report, and we are going to explore them in detail today in the presentation. This is the main page of the report, which you can download it for free on our website. You have to be registered though. And this report is based on the current standard in place for food additives, GB 2760, which is going to be updated very soon. And in the report, we also include expected changes to this standard. So yes, again, this is the QR code to access the report directly. You can find it on our report on our website, completely free, and you're welcome to do so. Now, before moving into the presentation, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Federica Vigiani, who is the manager of CICC Beijing office, for a few words about CICC.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Thank you to the EU SME Centre for organizing this occasion for the companies to understand better about the latest regulation. I would just like to give you a very quick introduction about our Chamber of Commerce. In the next slide, you will see a little bit that we are a business association. We are present in China, in all the main territories. We currently have 7 offices, and the China-Italy Chamber of Commerce is the only business association that is recognized by both ministries to represent the interest of Italian companies here in China. Again, yes, as you can see, we're part of the Italian system, and we collaborate very closely with all the partners here in China to organize business activities and provide support to businesses. Beijing is our headquarters, where we're based, and we are a multi-sector association. Among, of course, the sectors of interest for the Italian companies is the food and beverage. For the food and beverage, our chamber has a food and beverage working group that is part of our 12 working groups. The food and beverage working group includes all the companies working in this sector, so including producers, companies importing Italian products to China, and Italian restaurants. The food and beverage working group is very active and could be a very good source of information for those of you interested in the sector and interested in China, as it has a very strong network within the chamber and organizes many activities nationwide. So if you're interested in this sector, I invite you to follow more closely the activities of the group. And of course, if you're interested in knowing more of our chamber and what we could do for you, please feel free to reach out to us, and you can find all the contact in the closing slide. So thank you very much again, and hope you enjoyed the webinar. Back to you, Elika. Thank you.
Thank you, Federica. I'm Alessio. Anyway, and now we can get into the core part of this webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our two experts for today, and who are also the authors of this report on food additives we made. Ruben Martinez Gomez, who is a project manager for a project director for market intelligence at Avens, which is a very niche and very good consulting company specializing in food and beverage sector in China. And then Lydia Ye, who works together with Ruben. She's a project coordinator for the same department of the company. Ruben, Lydia, we leave the floor to you. Thank you again for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Alessio. Okay, give us just a second to share the screen and put on slides. Okay, so we are just seeing a glimpse of what's going to be today's content on food additives. As Alessio was explaining before, it's a bit of a tricky topic, or more than tricky, I would say. It's very technical, and the way it's regulated in China, it makes it a bit complicated to navigate, especially for foreign companies. So we'll try today to clarify some of the main issues or doubts that you may have. All of this it's explained in even more detail in the report that Alessio also mentioned. So of course we invite all the people in the audience to download the report and to go through it carefully. So we're going to start with a very brief overview of the legal framework in China for food additives, the relevant regulation on food additives, and then we will move on to the main standard regulating the use of food additives in China, which is standard 2760, and we will see that this standard is currently under revision, so we expect some changes to be implemented soon. We will see those changes later on in a different section based on the previous draft that China has released, and all these changes are expected to be implemented soon. But we clarify all the report and today's presentation based on the current standard, although we will foresee some of the changes expected. Then we will explain also the differences between food additives and raw materials, particularly for registration of new food additives or new raw materials, meaning those food additives that have not been included yet in the standard or in the later announcements from the National Health Commission, mean that they are not in these standards or announcements. It means that they are not allowed to be used, or they are not registered yet. So they require an application for new food additives. However, the definition and use of food additives sometimes might be confused with the application for new raw materials. So we will try to clarify to distinguish one from the other. And then we will explain the requirements and the information required to be included on food additives label. And here we will separate on two different products. We will see labeling requirements for food additives as a final product. So food additives being exported to China to be used as food additives. And we will see the labeling requirements for final food products that include food additives. So how the additives need to be mentioned in the label of food products. Then, as I said, we will explain briefly some of the changes that are expected to be included in the new version of the standard. And then we will jump into some practical questions to show you what kind of questions are answered in the report. And then we will have, of course, also the Q&A session with today's audience. So we invite you to pose your questions in advance in the chat during the presentation, and we will answer them in the end. So now I leave the floor to Lydia, who will start with the presentation. Lydia.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. And thank you, Alessio, and thanks everyone coming and watching. So for today's webinar, let's start from the legal framework. As we know, the overarching governing framework for food products in China, including food additives, is represented by the Food Safety Law of the People's Republic of China and implementing regulations of the Food Safety Law. But among beside of this, and so we still have many specific standards, for example, the GB 2760, and we think the GB 2760, the National Food Safety Standard for uses of food additives, is the most important one because it specifies the principles for the application of food additives, allowed food additive varieties and scope, maximum level or residual levels and categories of food in which the use of food additives is prohibited or restricted. But here we should emphasize here because for the nutritional fortification substances currently are not included in the GB 2760, but it has its exclusive standard, which is GB 14880. But for the revised version and the version which is in revision, and it says it will include the nutritional fortification substances in the new GB 2760. But yeah, but currently it's not. So here is the one we should notice. And beside of that, there are also, for example, like there are more than 200 standards for specific types of food additives, which actually about the quality specification standard for each kind of like each types of the food additive. For example, like the general rules for compound food additives or the National Food Safety Standard for food flavoring essences, etc. And also here we will have the labeling standards and will be explained later in the labeling section. And in addition, we also have the specifications for inspection and quarantine supervision and administration of import and export of food additives. Also, the administrative measures on new food additives. So about the new food additive and new food raw materials, we'll also mention about this again. And so here again, we will focus on, for today's webinar, we'll focus on the GB 2760 because we think it's quite important. But beside of that, here we should know that the GB 2760 does not include additional varieties or other food additives successfully registered after the publication of the standards in 2014. So which means all the food additives registered after 2014 and are approved after 2014 will be included in individual announcements of the National Health Commission, and we also know it's NHC, for 3 new foods. And so here we know that here we have to explain that the 3 new foods include new food raw materials, new food additives, and new food related products. So in different period of times, the NHC will issue the announcement of the 3 new foods, include those 3 types of the food products. And normally they will also have the interpretation of announcement issue along with it. So for us who want to check the standards for food additives, you have to not only to check the GB 2760, but also probably you also need to check the announcement of the NHC. And so, yeah, let's go to the GB 2760. So in GB 2760 here, we have the definition of the food additive. It says food additive in Chinese, 食品添加剂 refers to an artificially chemosynthetic or natural substance to be added to food in order to improve food quality, color, fragrance, and the taste, and for the purpose of preservation and processing technology. Flavoring substances, gum-based substances in paste-based candy, and processing aids in food industry are also included in food additives. And here we can see the 22 function in China. So according to the standards, the food additives are divided into 22 functions. But here again, we need to emphasize this again, the nutritional fortification substances are currently not included in the 22 function. So, but in the revised version, it will be. So here we have to emphasize that the functions are, the 22 functions are quite important, because it's not only like you can check the function of the existing food additive, but also if you are applying for new food additives, the functional categories can also be very helpful. And so the main content actually in GB 2760 actually include, here we have the 6 appendixes. And so for Appendix A, we have the provisions for use of food additive, except food flavoring substances and food processing aids. And so for the provisions for use of food flavoring substances, which are included in Appendix B, and provisions for use of food processing aids are included in Appendix C. And so for Appendix D, as we has seen in last slide, is the list of the main functions that food additives usually perform. So beside of that, Appendix D also has the interpretation of each function. And so Appendix E, which is the food category system, and so which also lists all food categories and food category numbers as defined and used in GB 2760. So Appendix F is the specific page number of each food additive listed in Appendix A. So let's go to the Appendix A first. So Appendix A has 3 tables. So Table A1 includes the additives permitted for use in certain food categories, as well as the corresponding maximum dosage or residual level. So here we have an example. So we can see that the name of the food additive and the CNS and INS numbers. And here the CNS means the Chinese numbering system, and INS is the international numbering system. So INS number is quite useful, especially when you are labeling the food additive, and we'll explain this later in the following section. And also we have the function here, and we have the food category number, and as we has explained. So the category number can be found in the Appendix E. And so we have the food category name and the maximum dosage of use and some other specific requirements on application and measures will be marked in note column. And so here we have to notice that if there is a maximum residual level requirement, it will also be indicated in note column as well. So for Table A2, it might be a little bit complex to think about, because it includes the food additive that can be used in all types of foods in appropriate dosage according to production requirements. But the food categories listed in Table A3 cannot apply the food additive that listed in Table A2, unless their special requirement has been specified in Table A1. For example, saying, okay, this category, for example, the category in Table A3, this category can apply, for example, this food additive in Table A1. So for example, we have the food additive here, and which is actually listed in Table A2. So here we might think, okay, because it's in Table A2, here we say the food additives in Table A2 can be used in all types of food. But if there are categories listed in Table A3, for example, the pasteurized milk, which is listed in Table A3, which means the pasteurized milk cannot apply this food additive unless there's exceptions specified in table A1. So which means we have to go to table A1 and find whether there's exception specified about the pasteurized milk. But then if we cannot, then we can say pasteurized milk listed in table A3 cannot use this food additive listed in table A2. So which means the table A3 lists the food categories in which the additive listed in table A2 or allowed to be used in upper food categories are not allowed unless otherwise specifically stated in table A1. Oh my, okay, you probably would feel a little bit confused right here because, okay, we know that the food categories in table A3 in which the food additive listed in table A2 are not allowed to use that food additive. But here we have another criteria saying, okay, the food additive allowed to be used in upper food categories are still not allowed to be used in food categories listed in table A3. Okay, so here we have an example. We can use the example to explain this as well. For example, we use the pasteurized milk example again. Here we know that pasteurized milk, here we know the category number is 01.01.01, and so we find the food, here's a food additive here, and we find the upper food category, the 01.0, which is a milk and dairy product, which is the upper category of the pasteurized milk in here. So we might think, okay, so all the food or the milk and dairy products can apply the, for example, this food additive, but here it says excluding products of the category 01.01.01. Okay, which means the pasteurized milk cannot apply this food additive. But which doesn't mean, what if there's no sentence about like the excluding products of the lower category, etc., etc. So even without this sentence saying excluding lower products, you cannot, the lower products in table A3 still cannot apply the food additives allowed to be used, the food additives in here. So yes, it might be a little bit complex. So we make this graph to explain and to make it clear for the procedures, and maybe it can be an easier approach to see how we can get the accurate provisions of the food additive you want. So we would recommend here, you go to table A3 and check the food categories the food additive you want to apply to, and see whether the food category you want to apply in table A3 or not. And if yes, it's better you go to check the table A3 directly, because no matter the food additive in table A2 or not, the only one can define the food additive, the food category can use this food additive or not is in table A1. So here we recommend you, if the food category you want to apply is in table A3, just go to the table A1 directly. And then if the food category is not in table A3, then you just go to, you have to check the table A1 and the table A2 both, and to see whether it's in table A2 with that food additives that can be used in all types of foods according to production requirement, or actually the food additives you want to use in these categories actually have some, requirements on maximum dosage or residual level. So to want to make it more clear, we have some example here to see how this kind of approach can be applied in practical cases. For example, in example 1, it asks, okay, can sucralose be used in group 1. So firstly, we have to find out the food category number of group 1 in Appendix E, and so that we can know also the upper categories according to the category numbers. And then, unfortunately, we find the group 1 is listed in table A3. So, which means we have to go to table A1 to find, okay, whether there's exception about this, the application of sucralose in group 1. So we find the page number of sucralose in Appendix F, and we find the sucralose in table A1. And remember, we find the category number of group 1, which is 15.03.01, and then we see only the upper category of the group 1, which is the fermented alcoholic beverages here. But can you see any exception specified in here? No. Okay, which means so the sucralose cannot be used in group 1. So this is one kind of example. Okay, for next example is, can pectins be used in dried pastas, noodles, and similar products? Again, we go to find the category number of the dried pastas and noodles and similar products. And then, unfortunately, again, it's listed in table A3. And so let's find the page number of pectins and go to the pectin in table A1. But here, look, we can see that the category number and the name dried pastas and noodles and similar products, all the numbers and also the category names are listed here, which means here we find the exception specified in the table A1. So here we can say pectins can be used in dried pasta, noodles, and similar products in appropriate dosage according to production requirements, because the maximum level requirement here is GMP. And so here's another kind of example. And so here, actually for this example, we won't go more details in here, because this one just want to tell you that some similar products from, produced from the same agricultural like food might have different provisions. For example, the fruit and vegetable juice and the fruit and vegetable juice concentrates might have different provision on the application of some specific food additive. So that's it. So if you want to see the details of this example, you can go to the report and check all the steps and procedures as well. And so let's go to the example for directly. And so this is an example saying, what if the food category I want to find is not listed in table A3? For example, here we find the processed cheese is not listed in table A3. So, okay, now we have to check, remember we have to check the table A1 and table A2. So we find the page number of the food additive we want to check, the paprika oleoresin. And so we find this food additive in table A2. So let's go to the table A1 and we find it here. We find the food category under the table, in the table of this food additive. So now we can see that paprika oleoresin is permitted to be used in processed cheese as long as its maximum level does not exceed GMP production requirements. So yeah, so those are the examples, and you can also find those examples in very details in the report as well. And so those are the Appendix A. We know it's quite complex. And so for the Appendix B and C might be more clear and easier to see the procedures. So for example, in Appendix B, which lists the provisions of the food flavoring substances. So it also says the purpose of the using food flavoring substances and essences in food is to produce, change, or improve the flavor of food. So which means, so if something only produce sweet, like the sugar, or sour, like vinegar, or salty taste, actually they are not included in here as the no matter flavoring substances or essences actually. And also here we should know that the Appendix B in GB 2760 are is focusing on the flavoring substances. So if you want to check, for example, the essences and also the flavoring essences, accessory, those kind of things, you have to go to another standard, which is the GB 30616, which is the National Food Safety Standard for food flavoring essences. But if you want to know some, technical requirement of the flavoring substances, because as we know, even if some of the flavoring substances can use individually or directly into the food production, but generally the flavoring substances are integrated into essences and then be used in the food. So if you want to check some technical requirements of the flavoring substances, please go to especially those flavoring substances integrated into flavoring essences, please go to the GB 30616 and to check those related standards here. And so here in Appendix B, we have 3 tables as well. The table B1 is the list of foods in which it is prohibited to add food flavoring substances and essences. And table B2 is the list of natural flavoring substances permitted in foods. And table B3 is the list of synthetic flavoring substances permitted in foods. And the procedures, as we said, gonna be much easier. So you just you can go to the table B1 to check the food categories you want to know and to see whether it is prohibited or not, and if it's prohibited to use the flavor substances and essences, so then you cannot add any kinds of flavoring substances or essences. And if it's not in the table B1, then you can check the food additive you want to know and to either in table B2 or B3. And again, here we wanted to emphasize, beside of the GB 2760, we also have the announcements for those food additives registered or approved after 2014 currently. So it's better for you if you can, especially if you cannot find the food additives in the GB 2760, it's better for you to check the announcement as well. And if you cannot find them neither in the announcement or in GB 2760, probably it means these food additives currently cannot be used in China, or it means you have to apply as a new food additive. And so then for the Appendix C, it lists the provisions of the food processing aids. So it says food processing aids refer to various kinds of substances that ensure smooth food processing but have nothing to do with the food itself. So which means it actually focuses on the production processing itself, but not for the final food. So it has 3 tables as well. So for the first one, table C1 is the list of processing aids excluding enzyme preparations that can be used in all kinds of food processing without limitation on the residual amount. And table C2 is the list of processing aids, again, excluding enzyme preparations that have limited scope of use. Which means only allowed in certain food categories. And so table C3 is a list of the enzyme preparation for foods, and also their resources and donors. And so then the procedures to find the accurate the food additive or the categories even easier. So you can just directly and to firstly check whether the processing aid you want to check is enzyme preparations or not. If yes, go to table C3. And if it's not, then go to table C1 or C2 to find its respective standards. And so, so for the, here we want to emphasize one more thing for the Appendix C. So generally in Appendix C, it also have some requirements. For example, we won't go all them in details, but one thing we think is better to emphasize here is that it says the processing aids generally should be removed before the final products are made. If these cannot be completely removed, the residual amount should be minimized. The residual should not cause harm to health and should not play a functional role in final foods. So I think this is one of the very important requirements for the processing aids, this kind of food additives. And yeah, so in GB 2760, we have a very special principle here. It's called carryover principle. So it specifies two situations, carryover situations. So situation one means here we might have some food additives can be introduced into foods through food ingredients, including other food additives. And so, which means, okay, you have a food additive which might have the effects on the ingredients, and then it might be taken by or carried by the ingredients into the final food. So here it has some requirement. For example, it must comply with the standards, which means the GB 2760, and for some standard including the scope and dosage, and etc. And the ingredients should be used under normal production process conditions, and the content of the food additive in the foods should not exceed the level introduced by the ingredients. And the third one, the level of the additive brought into the food by the ingredients should be lower than the level normally required for its direct addition to the food. And here we have an example. For example, the benzoic acid and sodium benzoate are not allowed to be used in cooked meat products, but are permissible in soy sauce. So therefore, if the food additive is detected in cooked meat products, of which soy sauce is the ingredients, then we can say, okay, if it's complying with the standards, okay, it can be considered to be carried over by the soy sauce. But here means, so we want to emphasize one thing for the producers of the foods. Here's might be one item that you should be very careful about. And so this kind of situation, the situation one means the accurate production ingredient information identification is quite important. For example, okay, you have a product which use the pickled mushrooms, but in your information labeled as ingredients, you just mentioned, okay, mushroom. Then if there are something ingredients in the pickled mushroom has been detected, then the authorities or the supervisors and will see only the mushroom in your labeling. Then it will be which might be considered prohibited because they cannot be sure, okay, are you using the pickled mushroom or fresh mushroom? So which means the accurate production ingredient identification is quite important. So then for the situation two, so it means when a food ingredient is used in the production of a specific final food product, the additives approved for that final food products are allowed to be added to the food ingredients. So, which means, for example, if you have the food additives, actually these food additives are using for the final products, but you can add it in the ingredients. Even there's no effect in the food additive has no effect in the ingredients, or even it's not permissible in the to be added in the ingredients. But for the carryover principle, then if you applying the carryover principle, you are complying with the standards, and so you can add this food additive into the ingredients and then take it into the final food products. For example, here we have the beta carotene, which actually can be used in cakes as a colorant, but cannot be used in edible vegetable oil. So, however, since beta carotene is fat soluble and can be evenly dispersed in vegetable oil, so beta carotene is sometimes or normally added to the edible vegetable oil used as a cake ingredients. So in order to facilitate the coloring of the cake. But here you should know that because this food additive is not permissible in these ingredients, but only it can be applied in the carryover principle. So which means the label of the specific food ingredients should be clearly indicates that the products will be used in the production of that specific food product. For example, in this example, you should say, okay, this edible vegetable oil is for the production of cakes. So this is the thing you have to label clearly. And so we've received many questions. So many of them actually are from like, for example, how to distinguish the food additives and the raw materials, especially when you're applying for a new ingredients. And also this is quite important, and we add this section in this webinar because actually all food additives used in China should comply with the basic principles. The first one, they are technically necessary and proven to be safe. And the second one, they must be registered and approved by the Chinese authorities. Hence, if a certain food additive or substance is not included in the relevant table, for example, GB 2760, or it's not in other approval announcements after 2014, then it is necessary for its producers to firstly submit an application for registration to NHC before it is allowed to be used in any food. So we have two administrative measures respectively for the new food additive and also for the new food raw materials. And you can see they have the definition on what kind of like ingredients should be applied for the new food additives or the new food raw materials. For the first one, the new food additives, what kind of ingredients should apply for the new food additive? First one, the food additives not listed in relevant national food safety standards. As we said, the GB 2760, or for example, the nutritional fortification substances, the standards for this one, the GB 14880, or the food additives, we should say, and the food additive not stated in NHC public announcements of the approved food additives, and also the food additives applying or like trying to apply for expansion on usage, scope, or dosage. So those are the ingredients, or we say the food additives must register and submit its application as the new food additives. And for the new food raw materials, it says some items that are not part of the traditional eating habits in China should apply as new food raw materials. For example, there are some animals or plants or microorganisms that are not part of the traditional eating, are not kind of like food of the traditional eating habits in China, or its components separated from those kind of food, or some food components with changed original structure, or other newly developed food raw materials. So for example, the plants like the chia seed, which are actually not a kind of food that in traditional eating habits in China, and or we can say the fish oil, which are also not a kind of like a traditional food in China as well. So those kind of things are the new food materials already registered. And so if you wanted to, because there are actually no clear or official definitions on how to distinguish the food additive or raw materials. And because for the characters of raw material is actually very general. Normally we just say, okay, the kind of like the food have the attributes of the food raw material. So it's not very easy to see from the raw material side. So it's better if we wanted to distinguish its food additive or raw materials, it's better we go to the food additive side. And because food additives has many special characteristics, for example, food additives have a particular role in improving food quality or processing technology with a specific function rather than an effect on the human body. So it actually means the food additive focus more on the final food products rather than, you know, as a nutrition for the human bodies and those kind of things. So, and also the food additives are intentionally added to foods, and also they are usually cannot be easily directly be consumed in consumer markets. And also, as we have explained in the GB 2760, usually it has the requirement on the maximum of the usage. And so then it also emphasizes that it should be used as little as possible, should be reduced as much as possible. And some other characteristics, for example, if the ingredients you are applying to is GMM, which is a genetically modified microorganism. And so if it's GMM, then you cannot apply these ingredients as the raw material, because currently the GMM is prohibited to apply as the raw material, but you can apply it as the food additive. And also another way you can see that whether the ingredients you are applying to has the suitable functional category. Remember, we in the GB 2760, we have the 22 functions, and also the nutritional fortification substances is also another kind of like function will be included in the GB 2760 as well. So you can find whether the ingredients, the effect of the ingredients is actually suitable for any of the functional category, and also whether these ingredients, whether application of these ingredients has its recommended usage amount. And again, because you know, like normally food additives have these like the requirements of the maximum dosage and the residuals, and usually are not recommended to be used that much. So yeah, so if the ingredients of the application of the ingredients has this kind of requirements on the usage amounts, so it might be considered as the food additive. And besides, it's better for the companies or the professionals to consider about the long-term application of these ingredients. For example, which kind of sections in Chinese market, for example, you want to target on? Is it for specific kinds of like foods as raw materials, or normally it's you think the ingredients or your products are better to be used as the food additive in some specific areas. And so yeah, so for the application and approval of the new food additives and new raw materials actually have not that differences, especially the procedures. So both of them need to prepare the documents and submit the application. And so the NHC will accept the application. And then the CFSA, we said it's China National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment. So they will conduct a technical review, normally within 60 working days. And then they will publish a draft of the announcement and interpretation for public comments. So after they receive the comments and finish the technical review, the NHC will decide whether to approve this food additive or food raw material or not. And then if it's approved, then the NHC will issue the official approval announcement. But those are actually the very basic steps. So if you want to find the very details about the documents and also the procedures, and so it's better for you to go to the NHC website to find out. And so here we have to emphasize one thing is that the ingredients already approved as food additives or nutritional fortification substances cannot be registered as new food raw materials as well. So even though there's no vice versa, so which means there's currently no regulation say, okay, the ingredients already apply as the food raw materials cannot be applied as the food additives as well, but it's really better for you, for the companies or the professionals to think about, which kind of whether you are applying for the food additives or raw materials carefully. And so, yeah. So also, and here we want to mention that some people might ask, okay, how about the materials for the application? Yes, they are definitely will have their differences and will have some similar, for example, similarities. For example, they will have the same materials such as the application form and safety evaluation and quality specification requirements, but they are definitely will have their different requirements on those kind of similar documents. And especially for food additive, they also require some special materials. For example, the materials or documents proving the technical necessity and use effect. Remember before we said, so the food additive can be used in China, actually have these technical necessity to be used. And so these kind of materials means if your food additives cannot show the technical necessity or the advantages of the use effect comparing with the existing food additives, the food additive you want to apply might be rejected because of this. So here we should notice about this. And yes, some other similar materials, for example, the safety evaluation for the food raw materials, every time you have to submit this kind of safety evaluation. But for the food additives, if you are applying only for the expansion of the scope and dosage of the existing food additives, you don't have to submit the safety evaluation again, except for only when the authority requires you to supplement this kind of materials for the technical review. And so even if, and on the other hand, even if you can submit those kind of like application or to solve those procedures by yourself online, but here we will recommend you to find the local agencies for the help, because it's for in case there's any, for example, barriers or misunderstanding about between the communications. So, and also if there's some requirements on the documents for the supplementary, so agencies will probably help for example, for any rejections or those kind of thing. Yeah, and
thank
so
you, Lydia.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we're moving to the next section. I think before we give the floor to Ruben, I would like to make one general comment. First of all, course, thank you for the presentation. It's a very complicated, as we've seen. I would like to say that in the report we have all the screenshots and the tables and the examples that Lydia showed are in the report. You will see all the explanations there. So, you know, we will also send the slides afterwards, but everything you will be able to find in the report as well. It's very complicated. Maybe before we move to Ruben, I would like to say that, you know, we are pretty much approaching the end of the presentation. We will be finishing by around 11. And before we move to Ruben, I think there are a few questions. Maybe we can start taking some of these questions already. There is one which is very interesting. You can see them in the Q&A box. There is one, of course, saying thank you for the clear explanations. Comparing to the European regulations or standards or the American or Japanese ones, the Chinese regulations and the standards, are they very similar to these, or are they aligned with the international standards, or there are very significant differences?
Okay, thanks, Alessio, and thanks for the question, and thanks to Lydia for the clear presentation so far. So about this question, basically all countries follow the Codex Alimentarius International Standards. So of course there are similarities in terms of regulation for food additives, and specifically for the EU and China, the level of harmony and similarity should be quite high. If any, the EU regulation on the use of food additives is stricter, so European producers should have, in general, should have no problems complying with Chinese regulations in terms of the use and dosage of food additives that can be used in food products. There might be some differences in terms of the labeling or the explanations that are required. And as Lydia was saying, there might be some food additives that are not included in the current regulation in China, but have been approved after the standard was released. So companies need to pay attention to those announcements by the National Health Commission to make sure whether their standards are accepted or not. But overall, we can say that yes, there is definitely a certain level of similarity between the EU regulation and China regulation.
Thank you, Ruben. There was also another question about what is the definition, because we talked about natural and synthetic flavoring substances. So there is one question asking, what is the definition of natural?
Yeah, so natural means basically naturally extracted, and normally it's from natural sources, mainly plants. And in contrast, synthetic are those that are extracted using chemical processes. So the standard has distinguished between natural and synthetic, and there are two lists of approved additives. So there is one list for approved and accepted natural additives, and natural flavoring, sorry, and a list of approved synthetic flavorings.
Very good. One last question before we move forward. On a smoked fish, is the natural smoke considered as additive and therefore needs to be declared on the ingredient list? Maybe this might take some time to answer, but.
Okay. This is an interesting one. The natural smoke, I don't think natural smoke is considered as an additive here. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
Maybe we can, you know, make our research and get back to the person.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that because
yeah, because it will probably relate to the, you know, the production process. So yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so maybe I would say to this person that please give us a couple of days to look in detail into the answer to this question, so that, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, exactly. We need some time to have a look into this. As Lydia said, this might be related just to the production process, so it doesn't need to be considered as an ingredient or an additive, or yeah, let us do some more research and get back to you, please.
Great. So now the question so far, you can, you know, move forward with your part.
Okay, thank you very much. So after Lydia's presentation, we're gonna move on with the requirements on labeling for food additives and for foods that contain food additives. So here, this is the main differentiation we want to make when treating food additives as a product itself to be exported to China, and when contained into final food products. So what are the considerations, or what are the requirements as per the Chinese regulations that the companies should pay attention to and comply with. So can we move to the next slide, Lydia? So starting with food additives considered as final products, we are going to see in the next slide what are the requirements for the labeling, and also regulation says that food additives can contain either all these items in the label or in separate instructions. So we can have both the label in the packaging and instructions within the packaging, but if all the items required are already included in the labeling, the instructions are not required. And there are different specifications, there are different regulations that companies should pay attention to when checking all the requirements. These are specified in the report. You can have a look at that. But basically, the most important one is the standard 29924, General Rules for Labeling of Food Additives, and different specifications and measures released by the relevant institutions. So can we move to the next, please? So we're going to see what are the items required in the outer packaging and the smallest selling unit. We are going to see this with this example here. So the different items that must be included is on top of the list. It should be clearly specified that this is a food additive and that it cannot be consumed directly. It's not for direct consumption, meaning it has to be used for further processing or manufacturing of food. Then we have to include the name, the name of the additive, according to the relevant regulations. So we cannot change the name; it has to be exactly the same. It has to include the ingredients list as well, if the additive is composed of different ingredients, production and expiration date, country of origin for those products that are imported, producer name and other details are not compulsory. As for food products, the producer name is not necessary to be included in the label. What is necessary is to include the details of the importing company and the company, the company that does the import procedures and will sell it, distribute it in China. And then other important items here to mention are the method of use and the dosage permitted according to the relevant standards, namely the 2760 or other standards that are applicable to specific food additives. As Lydia explained at the beginning, we have the standard for the use of food additives, 2760, but some other additives may have specific standards for their use and production and for the use in final food products. So we must also attend to those. And we, in the label, we must include as well the required storage conditions that basically how to store it and how to keep it in order to keep in good conditions. And yeah, also important to mention here, for those standards that are not, for those additives that are not included in the current standard because they were approved after 2014, they need to include the certification document number released by the National Health Commission. So this has to be mentioned as well, since they are not officially included in the standard yet, but they are permitted to use in China as per the later announcements. So can we move to the next, Lydia, please? Okay, and then for the labeling requirements of food additives in food products, the main regulation, the main standard that we must follow is 7718, the General Rules for the Labeling of Prepackaged Food. So some general rules to follow here is that the food additives have to be listed, included according to their used amount. how much of the final product they represent, and they have to be input in descending order. We're going to see later what are the different systems to list these food additives. But for food flavoring substances or essences, we don't need to specify the name of those. We can just include them with the generic term, food flavoring substances or essences, without the need of including the name or the coding as it is required for other food additives. And also food processing aids. No, there's no need to mention those in the label because, as we said earlier, those have to be removed from the final product itself. Only some residual amount is permitted, so these don't need to be mentioned. So here we have the different systems in which we can name the additives, and we're going to see them in the next slides with examples. So Lydia, please. So the first one would be to simply list all the food additives by their name, basically following the name that it's approved in the standard. We list them as we do for any other ingredients. Also, as you can see here, for compound ingredients, in this example, for example, we have the chocolate. We have to include in brackets after that ingredient. We have to include their different ingredients, and that includes also food additives. So those have to be listed within the compound ingredient. And then for the food additives directly applied on the food product that we are labeling, they can be listed according to the relevant order of the amount in which they are used, just with the common name. Another option in the next slide, instead of having the food additives name, we include the functional categories and the international number system number, which is the code followed by the international system. So here, instead of having the specific name of the food additive, we just include what is the function. Remember that the standard also has a list of functions permitted for food additives. So we'll have the emulsifier, thickener, colorants, etc. And we will just refer to them by the international number. And then another option is to indicate, again, the functional category, the function of the additive. And instead of the number, here we will add the name. So this is as option 1, but we will add before the name of the additive, we will add the function. And the last option, which is actually a combination of the previous 3, is exactly the same 3 options that we have seen, but we will list all the additives under a specific item called food additives. So basically, before the names, or before the functions and the names, or before the functions and the numbers, we will add an item as if all of these food additives were a compound ingredient, and then we will list them all under this category of food additives. So it's pretty straightforward. This is just the general rules on the different systems in which we can list the food additives included in our food products. And then can we move to the next? So here, as we said at the beginning, the current standard is in the revision. There's been 2 drafts released by Chinese authorities in 2017 and 21, and there's the latest call for comments on September 22. So the new draft is expected to be released soon. Not sure how soon, but it shouldn't be too long. And then if this is the final draft, the new standard will be approved also in the next months. And some of the changes that are expected to be included are listed here. You can see them in more detail in the standard, but very quickly, all the food additives approved after 2014, all of those that have been included in the announcement from the NHC will be compiled and included here. So that will help to simplify, to have all the standards that are permitted into the standard, not as now that you have to check all the different announcements. As Lydia said, nutrition fortification substances, vitamins, minerals will be included also here, will be considered as food additives, so the definitions will be adapted. There will be some changes in the food flavorings list that have to be included into food flavoring essences before being applied into food products. There will be some other modifications and updates related to some names, codes, and definitions of food additives. And the most important change is the new provisions for the use of food additives, which are collected in Appendix A. So all these tables and the process for search permitted food additives and which categories can be used, all this kind of messy way in which is the moment in the current standard. If we look at the tables in the order they are included in the appendix, this will be changed. So we still wanted to show how it is as per the current standard. We tried to show an easier approach or a better approach to understand how to search the food additives in the standard. But this will change, luckily, and hopefully for a simpler process. So basically, the change will be that the table A1 and A2 will be combined into a new table that will include all the food additives that are permitted and also the food categories in which they are accepted and the exceptions. So basically, by looking at table A1, we will be able to see all the food additives that are permitted and all the categories in which they can be used or not. So basically, any additive that is not included here means that this hasn't been approved to use in China. And after looking at table A1, we just need to look at table A2 to see what are the exceptions that are listed in that table A1. So for instance, table A1, we find specific food additive that we want to search, and we see that it can be used for all food categories except category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we go to table A2 and we see that categories 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are whatever categories, pasta meal, whatever. So if our category is not included in those exceptions, it means that food additive can be used according to the functions and the dosage maximum specified in the standard, of course. So basically, this is quite a change compared to the current system. So yeah, and here we've compiled some of the questions that are included in the report. So again, we invite you to download the report, go through the questions. They are based on practical cases and questions received by the EU SME Centre in the last years. So we've tried to make it very practical and to use real situations in which the companies can find themselves. And some of them you will see are related to the GACC registration and so on. So we might have time to go through some of them in a moment after we see if there are further questions in the Q&A. And the only thing I want to show you here, connecting to the last questions, is whether there is any tool or platform for companies to identify the food additives and the food categories that can use them in an easier way, or we must go to the standard. So there is actually a system provided by FoodMate, a Chinese agency, in which we can search both in Chinese and English. So this is pretty good help for European companies, in which we can directly search for the food additives that are permitted. And this includes not only those in the standard, in the current standard, but also those that have been approved in the later announcements by the Chinese authorities. So we can see there that they include all the announcements by the NHC after the standard release. So we can just type the name of the food additive. We can see in the next slide screenshot as an example. All of this is also in the report. So yeah, we can just type the specific food additive. We can see the Chinese name. We can see the maximum amount, the residual limits, and also the food categories in which it can be used and those that are excluded. Or alternatively, we can search for the food category relevant for us, and we can see here all the food additives that are permitted to use in that specific category. The platform also refers to the specific Chinese national standards applying for that particular product with links to the standards in Chinese. So this is quite a useful tool to identify food additives and food categories that are relevant for us. We still wanted to show, of course, the standard, because that's the only official source is the standard, the Chinese versions. There is also an official translations in English, but they shouldn't contain any mistakes. But since there is not 100% guarantee, so we recommend always to refer to the official sources, which this is not, but it's a very useful tool and helpful tool for companies. And definitely it eliminates the language barrier since it allows for the search in English. So that would be all. We're going to go now to the Q&A, but if there is any further questions, feel free to reach out to us, to events, either to Livia or myself, or to the emails that you can see here. Or also, if you have other questions, you can direct them to the EU SME Centre, and we will also follow up and try to provide support and help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruben. Very, very useful presentation, both from you and Lydia. Maybe if you don't mind stopping sharing your screen, as I have another couple of slides. So yeah, I would like to say that everything we have seen today, it's included in the report. It's crystal clear. The topic is very complicated, so it helps to have something written. So again, I invite you to access our report. I have the slide here, which again you can find it here. Maybe I would go through a couple of those questions in the report, which are really relevant, I think, relating to GACC registration. Of course, if in the meantime there are other questions, we still have 10 minutes of time. Please write questions in the Q&A chat. You can also ask us for help if you want to navigate through the appendixes of GB 2760. Now I would like to ask you, Ruben, to clarify a little bit. So GACC, the relationship between food additives and GACC registration. We all know that since last year, GACC registration is mandatory for all imported food. So can we give a clear answer for additives? Is it required for additives as well? What about if it's additive as a final product or food containing additives?
Yeah, so the key here, first of all, is to differentiate in whether are we talking about food additives to be exported as a final product, or final product doesn't mean for direct consumption. Final product means as a additive itself, or are we talking about products that contain food additives? So if it's the first case, if we are exporting food additives to China, then the GACC registration is not needed. It's the only exception for food products that don't need to go through the CIPER system. But then here again, we should pay attention to whether the product we are exporting falls under the definition of food additives in China. So for that, basically, we provide more clear answers in the report, but basically it needs to comply with the regulation and with the standards. So it has to fall under the functions allowed for food additives and under the definition of food additives in China. Then as for food products containing food additives, this is a different story. Those products do require GACC registration, and it is actually relevant whether they contain food additives or not. The final product needs to be registered, but not the food additives used in the product. All right. So basically, to summarize, food additives directly exported to China, no need for GACC registration. Food products containing food additives, they need GACC registration. And there is some within the registration in the system, they're required to include some information on raw materials and ingredients, and that includes food additives. But this information is not compulsory to be introduced in the system. So what we recommend is to not to include them. And if the authorities require clarification later, or they ask you to include it, then you do. But otherwise, there's no need to do it. But you still need to go through the GSC registration for that product. I hope
Very
that
clear.
was.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruben. And what about herbal extracts? We had a lot of issues with herbal extracts, which are used, in food supplements, functional foods, or even pharmaceutical products. And these are raw materials that are exported for industrial use. So the clients are other businesses rather than final consumers. How does it work in this case, the GSC registration?
So this would be pretty much the same answer. It depends on the herbal product in question, where it falls under the definition and use of food additives. So depending on the function and depending on whether it's permitted or not, whether it qualifies as a food additive in China or not. If it does, then as we said, food additives do not require GSC registration. If they not, that means that they must be considered as a raw material, as any other food product in terms of GSC registration, so they must comply with that. Or again, the third case, as we said, if this product in particular is just a product that contains food additives, then also it requires GSC registration.
Very good, Ruben. Thank you. There's one question in the Q&A box regarding the labels. Is Chinese label, like Chinese characters in the label, compulsory? And are there any requirements relating to the size of the characters used in the label?
Okay, yeah, as for the Chinese, sorry, I think I didn't mention, but yes, of course, all the labeling must be in Chinese. And as for the requirements in the size, I don't remember at the moment if there is any specific mention in the relevant standard. There might be. We will also have a look into that, and we can provide a more precise answer later on. We must check.
Thank you, Ruben. Also, maybe something else from our side that I'm happy to share regarding the Chinese label. Actually, the Chinese label also needs to be provided during the GACC registration process. So when you do the registration, you have to provide the Chinese label. And if you don't do, your application will be, will not be accepted. We see this happening a lot. So Chinese label is something that very, very high priority you should be working on since the very beginning. I don't know. I don't see other questions. If there are other questions, I would invite you to ask them now. We still have a couple of minutes. Otherwise, I will end it up here. Yeah, I would like to say that yeah, we will really be happy if you could take a couple of minutes to scan this code and give us your feedback. Give us your feedback about this webinar, about the report. We are going to organize quite a lot of webinars in the coming weeks, both online but also offline workshops. If you have any ideas, if you have any needs about potential topics, about locations, or even proposals to work together on a workshop, let us know. And you can let us know also through this feedback form, through this QR code here. If there are no other questions and no other comment, then I would like to thank you all for joining this webinar. Again, the slides will be, and the link to the recording of the webinar will be sent to your emails after maybe in a couple of days. The report is there on our website, ready to be downloaded for free. And the question we didn't answer before, we will also get back to you in a couple of days. So thank you all again. Thank you, Ruben, Lydia, for your excellent presentations, and see you next time.
Thank you, Alessio, and thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.